record. We'll do that. And so, Jess, I know that we have a lot of questions to talk about when we were trying to prime all of our audience for discussing teleservices and reimbursement. Where do you think we should start?
I definitely think we should start with why we all joined here today. And that's going to be because of a Senate bill in New York that's going to help our New York SLPs get paid for the work that they do equally as if they were doing their work in person. All SLPs should all get paid. I 100% believe that. So Selene is actually going to introduce us to this bill, and then we'll talk more about teletherapy and how we can support them.
Okay, great. So I, like every other speech pathologist in the country, began using telehealth as a modality in March when this global pandemic began. And I pretty much instantly fell in love with the modality. I think it's extremely effective. So I started doing some research about, I'm seeing now that the early childhood programs are adopting it, but there's always that caveat, like, only until the global pandemic ends, and then we'll go back to traditional services. So naturally, I was concerned about that because it's working really well for a lot of my families. So I began to reach out to my congresspeople, to my local senators, and through all of that communication, I was directed to Senator Marckham's bill, Bill 8785, which is currently coming up in the Senate in January when they resume session. And the bill talks about pay parity for SLPs and all health professionals, and is basically urging that practitioners are paid the same rate for telehealth as in-person services, because the bill details that it's kind of an incentive for providers to continue using telehealth as a means, because a lot of patients and clients like it. So the goal of the bill would be to ensure that all practitioners are paid an equal amount for in-person and telehealth services. So that's where we're at right now.
Yes. So the big goal is to try to get as much awareness about this bill, because a big reason why bills pass in government is because there's support of civilians, specifically voters, people who vote. So if you are a New York SLP, this is going to be really important for you. And there are ways that people who are not New York SLPs to be able to assist too. But first, let's get into teletherapy. I know there's still, I think, more SLPs than usual have been exposed to teletherapy than before. I think there's been a lot of hesitation about jumping into teletherapy. Usually the vibe you get from everybody is just, I don't know about that. So let's actually talk a little more about teletherapy first and really get that support out there. So do y'all, Selene and Loren, do you think teletherapy is just as viable and productive as in-person therapy sessions?
I don't think I know. I know it's just as viable.
Yes.
I actually wrote a blog post on this subject recently because I know a lot of people within the field as well as outside of the field are hesitant to receive or give speech therapy services via telepractice, and a lot of people are concerned that it's not as effective or it's not as good as in-person services. But I jumped into a lot of research that I found on the American Speech Language Hearing Association's website. And I cited a bunch of the research studies with a little overview on my blog. And all the research overwhelmingly supports speech therapy via telepractice as just as effective, if not more effective, than speech therapy services in person.
So, Ren, I agree with everything that you just said, and your blog post was amazing. I have definitely shared it with a lot of people because it's a really nice collection of evidence that supports telehealth. So I do definitely agree with you that a lot of SLPs are uncomfortable using telehealth as a modality. I mean, change is definitely uncomfortable, especially for people who have been practicing for a long time in a certain way. I I do really admire the way our community did dive headfirst out of necessity into the modality. I think that really speaks to us as a speech language pathologist that we are a great profession. Just having that mental and flexibility to be able to do so. I know a lot of practitioners, we're eager to get back to in-person services, but like anything else in healthcare, I think it's really important that we have choices and that our patients and clients have choices. So if they
Absolutely.
prefer to have this be a modality, then it should be there for them if they need it or if they want it, as well as our practitioners. So since my interest is really early childhood, and in New York State, we use the parent coaching model, I personally feel like telehealth is more effective because the parents are more actively engaged in the therapy sessions. We are working with the parents for, the duration of our therapy session, teaching them what to do so they can carry those skills over throughout the week. Now, I mean, I know that we're amazing as a profession, but 2 times a week for 45 minutes in isolation is not nearly as effective as the parents carrying the strategies over throughout the week. So
Right.
a lot of my parents feel empowered by learning about telehealth, and they feel like it's more convenient in certain aspects. You're not, schlepping a infant or toddler to a therapy session, and there's no bad weather cancellation. So I do definitely think that it can be more effective, depending on the clients and their preference and their motivation.
Yeah, I think it's always important to highlight the fact that we are not pushing for teletherapy to be for everybody. It's really just to be added as a choice. It should be accessible. It should be a choice. Just as much as we do in office or home health, teletherapy should be a choice for our clients as well as for us. That's really what we want to see. We know it's not perfect, but it should be a choice. And I think Ruchi can give us more insight into what that might look like even for adults.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I do provide gender affirmative voice services privately via tele, which I mean, obviously has its limitations. I am the kind of somebody who likes to work tactily, especially when we're talking about breath management, if we're talking about things with regard to alignment, posture, even giving cueing with regard to resonance targets in terms of doing voice and especially singing voice, which is one of my subspecialties. But I found that like what's really nice about the teletherapy model for gender affirmative voice and especially singing voice is that basically the onus is also on the client to build up their own awareness about the targets and whether and taking maybe an extra step of responsibility where it's like I can't completely cue you in the way that I would for an in-person service, and so you also have to report information back to me about what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, and taking ownership of the process in terms of transforming your voice. So that was something that came up for me. I also work with students via a company called Amplio Speech, and majority of my caseload, which is a small one, is high school students. You can either call them autistic students or students on the autism spectrum, as people prefer, but most of them are using AAC or multimodal communication strategies. That's very challenging. But I also recognize that there is a necessity to be able to provide these services to these students and to these clients during a time of a pandemic. And you don't want to put both your clients, their families at risk, or you and your own family at risk, but still want to meet those requirements. The other thing I wanted to delve into was you talked a little bit about some of the advantages of teleservices, but can we talk about, irrespective of infection control risk or quarantining, like what are some of the personal experiences that you've had that have cemented your like love of providing teleservices and your commitment to it?
Oh, where do I start? Well, as a bilingual therapist, there's not a lot of us, as you guys know. I recently did a project with my wonderful colleagues at Northwestern, and we looked at the demographics of ASHA and the amount of bilingual providers that there are, and the data and that they reported for last year. There's a very low percentage of therapists who speak another language that are ASHA members, I mean, across the board. And there is a very high percentage of clients that require services in another language. So we have this kind of catch-22 situation. So previously, if you didn't happen to live in an area where there was a bilingual therapist, you know, and you only spoke, let's say, I mean, I speak Spanish, but there's a lot of other languages that need to be, you know, that need to be addressed as well in this conversation. So if there was a low incidence language, I mean, you were kind of out of luck. You were working with the provider that you could find that was in your area that kind of like matched your schedule, and that was it. The patients
maybe accepted your insurance.
Yes. So there was all these filters that they had
the
to
stars have to align.
Yeah. So there was all these filters you had to go through when you were matching a client to a therapist. Whereas now, you know, I live in Suffolk County on Long Island, and I'm in Eastern Suffolk County. So there's, again, not a lot of bilingual therapists out here. And the kids on the East End were not receiving services in their native language. And we do know through the evidence that it is best practice to try and work with the families in the language that they're the most comfortable, especially when we're doing family training. So there's, you know, that whole barrier has kind of been alleviated, number one. Number two, as a therapist, I spent a lot of time in my car before. And I mean, just kind of like from a practical standpoint, I think I mentioned to you guys recently that I saw a child who was in Montauk and a child in the Bronx on the same day, and like an hour apart from each other. So if anybody is familiar with the geography of New York, that is like a 4-hour drive at least.
I was going to tell you, Selene, I was like, I've played Spider-Man on PS4, but that's like my understanding of areas in New York. So thank you for explaining how far those are apart.
It's really
I could swing there in 15 minutes. I don't see a problem.
It's really far. So Montauk is 90 miles from New York City, but then you put like about 90 miles, I mean, give or take, actually probably like 120 miles. It's the end, as they call it. So it's literally hanging off the end of New York. It's the furthest point east in New York. And then the Bronx, which we all know is famous for its wonderful traffic and all the things that come with urban life. So that would be at least a 4-hour commute. And those kids both got their services that day. They were on time. I got to work with their parents, and everyone was happy. And we had a very, very successful outcomes that day. So, I mean, just even from a practical standpoint, you know, it's just, it works for me.
Yeah, how much easier are no-shows when you can just stay in your pajamas?
Yes.
Like it's computer. Time to do your documentation, the time that you would have spent driving between homes, waiting, knocking on somebody's door, waiting 15 minutes.
Paying the money that you earn for the car that you, paying the money you earn on the car that you wore down to get there. Well, Loren, like Ren, give us some of your like personal solidifications of I gotta support teletherapy.
Oh, okay. I started doing telepractice in December, so actually before the pandemic, coming up on a 1-year anniversary of doing telepractice, and telepractice only. Like I didn't just hybrid it. No, I've been doing telepractice full time since last December. Started because my husband is a dual citizen, US Canadian, and he is doing his PhD in Canada. So we needed to live someplace where he could commute to school whenever he needed to for research or TA. And I needed something that I could still work in my profession in the states that I'm licensed in. And we also share a car. So I switched over to telepractice to close the distance on our relationship, which started local and went long distance when I did a travel contract in Hawaii. And I moved back to close the distance, ended up doing telepractice. I was inspired by a friend of mine who has been doing telepractice for 5 years. She lives in Poland, and she treats students in Virginia via telepractice. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, there's something I can do. And I was not expecting to love it as much as I do. But I love it so much. I love making speech therapy services more accessible to students and clients. I love taking the commute out of my day and having better work-life balance and having more time and energy to actually devote to the people on my caseload. I have time to actually plan therapy and to do my documentation notes and not be like scrambling between sessions or scrambling to and from work or between buildings. Like I worked in New York City in person. I did undergrad and grad in New York City. I did my clinical fellowship in New York City and had my first job with my C's also in New York City. So I've had times in New York City where I was split between 2 different schools. So I would commute to one school in the morning, see kids there, gobble down my lunch, leave that building, like run to the subway, hope everything was running on time, get off the subway, run up the stairs, sign into a different building, run up like 3 flights of stairs, get into my therapy room, fight with the printer, pick up my students, do our session, walk them back to class, run back down, back on the subway, back to the other school to finish up with my students there. And it was hectic. And I feel like, I did the best that I could with this situation, but I don't think my students were getting the best of me because I was expending all of this time and energy and stress just getting to and from where I needed to be. And like, even in the same school, that school was like heavy on push-in model. We actually didn't have a therapy room at the first school. Everything was push-in services with middle schoolers and high schoolers. So just traveling between the different classrooms to get to my students would take up time because you're taking up 5 minutes walking down the flight of stairs or down the hall to the next classroom, finding a chair for yourself, arranging everybody, trying not to interrupt the teacher mid-lesson. So much time wasted.
You are definitely describing what I think is part of the SLP burnout experience.
Absolutely.
Absolutely describing part of what's burnout for us, what puts us at a disadvantage and ultimately puts our clients at a disadvantage, our ability to do our jobs, our ability to service people and be able to maintain what we can and can't do as this job demands. So, you found a great escape in teletherapy. So let me ask you, you definitely had a lot more extra work to do when you were in teletherapy, but you and Selene, do y'all still do documentation?
Yes.
Does it still take you the same amount of time to do your documentation as if you were doing in-person services?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Do you still have to prep and plan for your students?
Yes.
Do you still have to pay and buy materials?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Do you still have to do your continuing education and pay for that?
Of course.
Yes, we do.
Do you still have to pay for your certifications?
Yes.
You do. Asha sends a letter every day to remind me it's coming.
Yes. So and then of course, do you still have to provide quality service that are met to for our clinical competence to the standards expected?
Ethically, that is a requirement.
Yes. So y'all
We're not
are doing
phoning it in.
Yeah. So even though teletherapy has all these great advantages and lets you escape a lot of the horrors that lead to burnout, SLP burnout, y'all still do the same amount of work as in-person therapists.
Yes.
And so let me ask you, are you paid the same amount in your state for your teletherapy services as if you were doing in person?
Okay. There's 2 answers to that question. It depends who's paying. As we learned, Medicaid funded programs are required right now to pay the same rate. However, that's not always what an agency or a company will pay. And a lot of times, Ren, I think you brought up the stats that it's at a 50% rate of what a standard rate would be.
There's definitely one insurance company, Excelis in New York, And I was speaking with somebody and they said at one point, Excelis paid only 50% for speech therapy via telepractice as they would reimburse for speech therapy in person. And that's just very insulting to a healthcare professional. Like, we're healthcare specialists.
Yeah.
Our credentials do not disappear depending on our service modality. Our skill set does not disappear. The quality of our services is not reduced. It's the same amount of time. It should be the same rate. Everything is the same, only the service modality has changed. There shouldn't be any decrease in the rate.
Yeah, it's the same as saying like somebody who saw a patient for an outpatient clinic should get paid more than someone who saw them in the home. It's just the difference of the service modality. That's it. So if we expect an outpatient clinic person to get paid and reimbursed the same as an in-home, I think it's safe to say that we should ask that for our telehealth providers as well, especially since many of us need to rely on it, not just for the pandemic, but moving forward after the pandemic, relying on this for our pay and income. And I can only
imagine our livelihood.
And I can't even imagine the people who lost money while continuing to work through a pandemic just because they had to go to teletherapy. And I mean, so we're kind of coming up on a time where we want to start wrapping up. Let's get back to, now that we have this idea, and I would love to talk to you guys again about some data and research. Yes, I think we should talk to each other again. But really quickly, let's just go ahead and go over what people can do to help support this bill, get it passed so our New York SLPs can get the money they earned. And also, want to mention the fact that if you guys actually, the people who are out there listening, actually participate and help support, I will actually put your name into a drawing, and I'll talk about that, getting some free things. So Selene or Loren, who'd like to go first?
So I do know that we can go on to the New York State Senate.gov and look up the bill, and there's a very nice handy button that says, do you support this bill? Yes or no?
You must be a New York citizen to be able to support it.
Yes. So they'll ask you, your district, and, they'll verify that. So the senator's name is Senator Marckham. It's spelled a little bit differently than one would expect. It's Harckham, Marckham. And it's Bill 8785. So, when you pull that up, you can click yes to support the bill. And if you want to create an account, you can follow the bill and you'll get updates about it as well. But that's optional, of course. You can just show your support by doing that. You can write letters to your local representatives and let them know that you're in support of the bill. You can share this with your community so other people can also support the bill. Those are just some ideas that I have been kind of working through. I also created a petition on change.org to keep telehealth permanently, and we have well over 500 signatures at this time. So I'm trying to garner as much support there prior to sending it to my local congresspeople. And
you do not have to be a New York citizen to sign the petition.
Yes, you don't.
No, you don't. Not at all.
So those are a couple things that you guys could do out there.
Well, I know another thing is just, like I said, New York is going to have to take care of New York, but the people who are not in New York, you can help take care of them too by actually signing that petition. So that's a plus. And then I wanted to let you guys know that as a way to help encourage you to offer your support, I have a $50 allowance to PlaySpark. They are unaffiliated with SPAN, but they are SLPs who started their own business making materials for SLPs. and they're young, they're getting started, they're local to me in North Carolina. And so I want to give them some support. So by showing a screenshot of you supporting the bill, either clicking that I button or showing that your name is on that change.org petition, you don't have to donate anything. Just, sign that petition, send a screenshot to us, and we'll put your
And
name
share
in for a
it.
drawing.
Share the petition.
Yeah, and
too.
share it, preferably share it. And then we'll put your name in for a drawing. So we'll try to set that up for the next 2 weeks, kind of lead up at least until Christmas, try to get that garnered. And then on Christmas, we'll find out who got their Christmas and or holiday present.
Yes, you can message Jessica Mitchell, myself, or post on the SPAN Facebook page. You can share with us via direct message or PM on Instagram. You can email us at speechpathologyadvocacynetwork@gmail.com. Either is fine. We'll take your messages. We'll take your signatures. That's great. And thanks for reminding me that I need to share that petition soon too. I did want to have a follow-up question. Obviously, both of you ladies have been very effective in terms of getting this message out there, having such faith and conviction in your service delivery model of choice for good reasons. I've had to buy into it myself this year, and it has, really changed my life in many ways. But I wanted to ask you, for other states, a lot of the feedback I'd gotten was that because of COVID-19, these services were being reimbursed at the same rate. We know that these things can change if the pandemic changes. What is your advice to SLPs in other states in terms of how do they advocate for themselves so that we can maintain this reimbursement rate irrespective of whether there's a pandemic or not?
Well, every state has its own policies and things are, different across the board. So there's not really like any blanket advice for that, but I do have an amazing colleague in my cohort at Northwestern who actually kind of inspired me to go on this journey. And she was able to advocate for telehealth in her state and got it passed to stay permanently. Amazing. So she kind of coached me through how to begin reaching out to our local representatives. And I think that that's a really good place to begin. What I did was I wrote a letter, which I sent to many people many times in a row, because, persistence is key, of course, in all of these things. And, eventually I got an answer. So your local representatives are invested in your community and they want to hear from you. And what you're proposing is not anything harmful or damaging. It can only help the community. So, it's kind of like a win-win situation for your representatives. Like, I'm advocating for bilingual families of young children to receive their services. So they're listening because that's a positive thing that you're advocating for. You're not asking them to fill a pothole or change a traffic light or do anything that's going to, be difficult or irritating to them. You're trying to do something good for the community. So, remembering that when you're advocating for, the service modality is really important because it is a positive thing. So that would be my advice, to contact your local representatives.
And another point I wanted to add, and if Loren, if you want to jump on that or share anything in addition, I think we need to equate the value of the services. I think I see a lot of messaging online and in conversations that I have with other SLPs about how they just don't find it that effective because they haven't found their rhythm or they haven't found their modality with teleservices that they feel as efficacious as they do with in-person services, which is fair because I think there's a learning curve to anything whenever you're shifting your modality. However,
no one trained us. No one really sat down and trained us to teletherapy. We were always trained to be in person. We were put at a disadvantage at something we are completely capable of doing.
Right. And I think teletherapy companies existed and people were providing teleservices privately way before the pandemic hit for a reason. Yes. And so I think as SLPs, we have to really support friends of ours who are either doing a hybrid model of in-person and teletherapy or purely teletherapy, and having faith in the advantages of those services so that we can all really advocate together that irrespective of the modality that we're choosing or irrespective of the modality that we're given in the case of 2020, that we support each other, that we are, providing services at the highest possible standard. And that we have the creativity as speech language pathologists to make that work and actually reach more people. I mean, if there wasn't teleservices in terms of gender affirmative clients, I don't know how, a lot of trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming individuals who want voice services, especially if they're let's say elective services, because there's no underlying vocal fold pathology. And if there's no competent service provider, or if their option is to go in person to see someone who isn't trained and isn't culturally responsive to this community, what would we do? That's where my mind always goes. They have the right with their dollars to pay someone who is competent to provide those services, even if they're not in the same city or the same state. I mean, of course, with licensure, you have to have that consideration too, but that's where my heart is. But Loren, if you want to go off of that.
I've been doing telepractice in New York since April. And I would say that a lot of students on my caseload were not receiving speech therapy from the beginning of the school year through April. And if it weren't for me coming onto the scene and being able to provide services via telepractice, those students would go an entire school year, if not longer, without the services that they're entitled to, that are outlined on an IEP, which is, as we all know, a legal document. And if the school is not providing those services, their families can go to due process because the school is violating a legal document, not providing these services. The family can go to due process and sue the school district for not providing services like speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy. And then the district has to pay out for these families to receive these services elsewhere, either at maybe a private school for children with special needs or an in-person private practice in the area. And I just think it's illogical to tie up the courts, to take taxpayer money, to have these potential lawsuits between the families and the school districts when the students can be getting their services in a high quality way via telepractice all along, and keep the family's faith in the school system and the school district, and just not have this animosity between the families and the school districts, and instead to be able to work together to provide the services that these children are entitled to, just from the beginning.
I totally agree. I can't believe those children would go a full year without therapy. That's
in New York
actually
City.
What bothers me the most.
In New York City, we have a lot of people. There are plenty of SLPs in New York City. But I guess everybody's caseloads are full, and we have SLPs who are split between schools. So they may have, the 30 or 40 minutes in the middle of the day that they could have used to fit a session in via telepractice is spent commuting between two schools or children's homes for early intervention, for example. And it just blew my mind. Like, if New York City is having trouble finding SLPs to serve these children, what about the other towns in New York that don't have as many SLPs? Or it could be a rural area or an area that's not as desirable to live in because of, not a lot of job opportunities, or high crime, or it's in the snow belt, like they have lake effect. Like, New York is a huge state, and there are so many children and adults and babies that need our services, right? We all know SLPs work through the lifespan from birth to death. And we're ready and willing to give these services, but we
And
need
you should get paid for it.
and we need to be paid, our full rate to provide these life-changing services. Because, as much as I love telepractice, as much as I love my profession and what I do, I would not be doing it for a 50% discount every day. Like that's, that's an insult to everything that I've worked for to be in this profession. And that just devalues our profession and the work that we do to say, oh, well, it's only worth this.
And not to mention the tech investment that comes into, if you're providing teleservices at the best possible level, you have to have like, high powered Wi-Fi, you have to have a good mic setup, you need to have a computer that's going to be able to manage all of your files. Sometimes people have to, if it's private practice, you have to invest in something like G Suite or something that's a HIPAA compliant server. If you were to do that through Zoom, that's like $2,000. So in terms of like
it's $200 a month, I believe, per provider. So if you're a private practice owner and maybe you've got some SLPs that you employ, that's $200 for you. 200 for you, the people you employ, each one. Everything needs to be HIPAA compliant.
Exactly.
Compliant for anybody outside of school, anybody within school. It needs to be FERPA compliant. So yes, there is.
There are all these hidden costs that people don't talk about. And I think at a further offering, we can talk about those pieces and all the considerations when somebody wants to go into teletherapy. I think after hearing all of you speak, as well as, myself, I think people might want to actually, bridge the gap or feel the pressure to do that. And SPAN also wants to make sure everybody feels supported in it, both in advocating for it and doing it at the highest possible standard of care, the most responsible way. And so I haven't seen any questions in the Facebook chat, but I'm going to just say, I'm going to encourage anybody watching this, please send us your questions. You can send it to Speech Pathology Advocacy Network at gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at SLP_advocacy, and you can PM us or post on any of these, I guess our posts that are related to this talk. Reach out to us on the Facebook group. You can join us or, message any four of us, and we'd be happy to make a video offering where we can answer questions and have a print option as well. Is there anything else anybody wants to add before we end session for today?
We're here to help if you haven't done telepractice yet, but you want to give it a try, or if you are doing telepractice, but you feel like you haven't found your groove, we're here for you. There's plenty of other SLPs who are here to support you, and we could, run mock sessions with you. And there's plenty of groups on social media where we share our therapy ideas for telepractice. We share free resources and therapy materials that lend themselves well to digital therapy. You're not in this by yourself. People have been very supportive of their colleagues and their future colleagues. And I'm really hoping that other people fall in love with telepractice as much as we have.
All right.
Well, very well put, Ren. Thank you.
Also, feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a better understanding of politics and being politically involved. It doesn't always have to be protesting and walking the streets. I can happily help you write letters to your senators, find out how to email your senators, how to figure out who your governor is, who your district is. I'm happy to help you do those things. It's a lot easier than you think. And quite frankly, it's kind of all online.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was a major aim for SPAN too, is just we want to support local advocacy efforts. And we want to highlight people like you, Selene, and you, Ren, who are doing advocacy in different areas so that people know it's possible. It is not a moot point. To the letter writing and going through your senators and your representatives is not a dead art or something that's it's automatically a dead end. It can lead to something like this, which is really powerful. And we want to inspire others to be able to, advocate for themselves and initiate this process and network, right? That was the dream. So thank you so much for the both of you for sitting with us today and sharing and being so generous with your time. It was such an honor. Jess is like a wonderful, moderator, and thank you so much. It was just an honor to like watch all of you have this like conversation, and it feels really alive in this space. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
You.
I think she just stopped up, but like, I'm going to stop recording and we'll stop live stream and I will stop recording.